Hello, welcome to another episode of Jim's Allotment Garden. Today's episode is all about water. Now, water is everywhere. It brings life to this planet that we're on. Our bodies are made up, if you look at a cellular level, our bodies are made of 99.9% water. And without water, plants and ourselves will not survive. So it's understanding how to use water in the garden is absolutely critical and central to having a good, healthy crop. So this episode is dedicated to how to use water within the garden. Okay, so I want to do Mother Nature Part 11 now, and in Part 11 I'm going to be talking about all about water in the garden, which is what I was saying I was going to do last week. And this is going to be a few clips of video that I've put together. It may be over a number of videos that I'll release this week, because there's quite a lot to say about water. It's not a particularly easy subject to sort of grasp, to be honest with you, because there's quite a few factors that you need to think about, and what I've tried to do is make it as simple as possible for people to understand. So this first section I'm going to be talking about sort of generalised things about water, then I'll be talking about more specific things later, and I've got 20 tips of the best way to water plants, and to make it easy for everybody. So this first bit is just a little bit of an introduction to it, and knowing when and how much to water your garden is quite critical. Overwatering will cause problems, underwatering will cause problems, and in both ways your plants won't grow particularly well, and it makes a massive difference to the success of the garden and also the yield that you'll get from your crops. Now, overwatering, which is done quite often, leads to weaker root system in the ground, because the plants become lazy and they won't grow the roots quite like they should do. It also, if you water too often, the water sits on the top of the ground and you get a lot of evaporation off the top of the ground, and it doesn't go into the ground where you really want it for the plants to absorb. You also create problems from the fact where you've got a humid environment, and in these humid environments things like funguses and stuff like that and other disorders associated with plants will thrive. So overwatering is really quite detrimental to your garden, and it's something most certainly to be avoided. Apart from creating this damp environment, or too damp environment, it also washes the minerals out of the ground and away from your plants, which obviously you don't want to do. But really the one thing that you need to consider is it really encourages things like blight and other fungal type diseases. So really, you need to make sure that you don't overwater your plants. What you should really be doing is what we call deep watering, and deep watering is you're much better off to water really well 2 times a week than watering every day a little bit, because what you want to do is give the ground a good soaking and get the water into the ground, and then the ground will sort of absorb that water, and the plants will be able to get to the water and the minerals which are in the ground. Now, the absorption rate of soil is surprisingly low. In an hour, water will only absorb into the ground by about 8 millimeters, so by that much. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this, if you water your garden particularly with a sprinkler, after you've gone over it and you take the sprinkler away, just stick your finger into the ground and see actually how far into the ground that the water's gone, and you'll find it's probably only about a centimetre or so that's actually gone into the ground. But for a standard soil, it's actually 8 millimetres per hour it'll actually seep into the ground. So you need to bear that in mind. There's some things that I can suggest to, you know, sort of get around this. So to reduce the evaporation, stuff like that, there's a whole raft of things that you'll be able to do, which I'll explain in a moment in the 20 tips of how to water plants. Sprinklers really are not that good. Sprinklers are good for lawns and stuff like that, but for a vegetable plot, apart from onions, I would strongly suggest that you water with a can or with a seep hose, because apart from the fact with a watering can or a seep hose, you're not watering the leaves. You don't want to water the leaves of a plant because that's going to cause you problems. You want to water the roots of the plant. You want to get the water into the ground, and sprinklers will saturate the leaves of a plant. If you saturate the leaves of a plant, the plant can't breathe. It can't breathe through the leaves. You know, you're not getting the water to the roots. You're going to get a lot of evaporation. So a lot of the water you're putting in there is just going to evaporate off. And you know, you're much better off using either seep hoses and giving the ground a good soak over, you know, a longer period of time, or by just doing the honest way of getting yourself a watering can and going up the row and water the ground at the base of the plants rather than sort of sprinkling water. So the top 20 hints that I can give you for watering the garden. Number one is knowing your crops. Some crops need more water than others, and crops need more or less water dependent on the type of year. The time of year or which part of the growing cycle they're in. Things like onions, peas, beans need to be watered regular. Throughout the growing season, particularly beans when they flowered, you need to give them plenty of water. But beans and peas really need as much water as possible, you know, to keep them growing. Things like spinach, onions, and other plants like that. The thing that you need to be careful of is they don't run dry. So, you know, you need to give them plenty of water, but you need to make sure that they don't run dry. If they do run dry, they will bolt and run to seed. So what you need to do is make sure that they're kept reasonably wet, but not particularly watered a lot every day. But you most certainly need to water them on a regular basis so that the roots don't dry, because if they do, they'll run to seed. So that's another real tip. So all I can say is know your crops, and the plants, things like onions, peas and beans, you need to make sure that you water them regularly every day, really, in hot weather. And you know, and things like spinach and other plants that are likely to bolt, you need to make sure that they're kept wet. You don't necessarily need to water them every day, but you need to make sure that they don't dry out. The second thing is, do you really need to water? Because this is how you avoid overwatering. What I suggest you do is stick your finger in the ground and feel if the ground is wet. Not the top inch or so, but the ground underneath is wet. If that's wet, you probably don't need to water, because that's where your plant's roots are. Obviously, when you think of a plant, an onion's root's going to go down about 6 inches to maybe 9 inches. Other plants, the brassicas, are quite shallow rooted. As long as you've got water down sort of 3 inches below the ground, then you don't really need to water, so don't overwater things. Things like seedlings and small plants, you know, when you're establishing them, they need to be watered daily, obviously. Point number 4 is don't make lazy plants. If you overwater a plant, the roots won't form correctly. They won't go down far enough to get their own water. Really, you want the plants to be as self-sufficient as possible so that they grow better. And if you've got a larger root system, then they'll be getting more nutrients out of the ground. You know, they'll have more ability to get nutrients, not only water. If you water a plant too much, it'll become lazy and it'll only form a small root ball. Because it only forms a small root ball, it won't be able to get the nutrients out of the ground. So that's another reason for not overwatering plants, particularly when they're establishing themselves in the ground. Parsnips are another plant that you don't want to overwater. When I put the seeds in, I water the drill and then I don't water them again for a month, unless it gets really hot and dry. But you know, most certainly some seeds you don't really want to water. You know, you basically water them to get them started and then leave them to it. So that's another reason for not overwatering. If you are overwatering, a good sign of that is around the edge of the leaf of a plant, particularly sort of more perennial plant or even brassicas, you'll get a browning at the edge of the leaf. That's telling you you're overwatering the plant. Number 6 is water in the morning or at night. Don't water midday because you get a lot of evaporation. The water won't go in. You want to water when it's cool. First thing in the morning. If you can't water first thing in the morning, like me, because I'll go to work early in the morning, you want to water at night. If you water at night, don't water when it's dark. You want to water no later than kind of 2 hours before the sun goes down, because any splashes of water you get on the leaves, you want that to evaporate with the sunlight before it gets dark, because that can cause all sorts of problems. Another good reason for not watering in the daytime is water droplets on the leaves can form like a magnifying glass, and the sunlight will burn the leaves. So that's another reason why not to water in the. Should be watering the leaves anyway, but if you do get any little droplets on the leaves, they can form a magnifying glass and burn the leaves. So always water the ground in the morning or at night. 2 hours before it goes dark is really the last time you can water in the day. Water the ground and not the leaves, as I've said, is number 7, because you're promoting fungus, or the environment for fungus to grow, and blight and things like that. And strawberries, most certainly, you need to be really careful with strawberries. As soon as they're flowered, you need to be really careful that you don't create a damp atmosphere, because strawberries will be absolutely massacred by fungus if you're not careful. Where I typically, with my strawberries, is I water them really well at the beginning of the year. As soon as they're flowered, I stop watering them, and just sort of leave them to it. And some of my strawberries do tend to get a little bit dry. I might put a little bit of water in there at the bottom really carefully, but I really don't water the strawberries at all during the fruiting period. Knowing your soil is really important, and I'll come on to more detail in this in a minute. But knowing your soil and plant accordingly. If you've got a damp area in your garden, plant the plants that are good in that area. If you've got a dry section of your garden, plant your plants that like dry environments in that. So plant intelligently, according to what the ground's like. Also, help your garden by augmenting the soil by putting lots of carbon rich compost in the ground, like straw and stuff like that, because this will hold the moisture and the nutrients within the soil. And it'll absorb the water and hold the water, so you need to water less, and it stops the ground getting too sort of bogged down as well. Point number 9 is shelter. Now, shelter comes in quite a different number of forms, and basically what you're doing is you're minimising evaporation from the sunlight and the wind. So use mulch on the ground where you can. That'll stop the surface drying out. Use shade, any pergolas or anything like that you can put in, or any netting over the top of your plants. That'll stop the sunlight from sort of warming up the ground too much and the water evaporating off. And also it's a wind, it reduces the wind. Put windbreaks in. As you noticed last year down there, I've got some corrugated polythene that I put up and make a windbreak where I've got the sweet corn. The reason I do that is to minimise the wind across the sweet corn to keep the ground wet, and that minimises the evaporation. Point number 10 is don't compress the soil. Compressed soil, the water can't get into it. You want the soil to be nice and loose, so as you water it, the water just goes straight into the roots where the plants are taking the water. If you walk on the ground, you compress in the soil, and when you water it, the water's just going to sit on top of that compressed soil. So you want to keep the soil nice and loose. Don't walk on the ground. Put walkways, as I've explained, using pallets or scaffolding poles, and just stick to set footpaths in the garden. Don't walk on the ground where your vegetables are, because that will most certainly be a detrimental effect, not only for the plant establishing its roots, but also the water getting through to the roots for the plant to grow properly. So don't walk on the soil. I can't stress that enough. That's really important. If you have got a bit of the ground where the ground's become hard and loose, and not to disturb the plants too much, but just get a fork in there and just loosen the ground up, and that will encourage the water to get down to where the roots are. Again, number 11, I can't stress this enough, plenty of organic matter in the soil, and the advantage of this is obviously it absorbs the water in the ground, and it also keeps the ground active. All the bacteria and that will keep the ground all broken up for you and aerated, so that's the best way to do it. Point number 12 is use soak hoses, not sprinklers. Use watering cans and target water. Basically what I'm saying is don't just go over and just sprinkle water all over the place. If you've got a particular plant, water the roots of that plant. Don't sort of sprinkle water all over the place, because you may as well throw it on next door's garden or wherever, because a lot of it's going to evaporate. Water where you need, and water sparingly is the name of the game. Okay, so number 13 on the tips of water is to plant in indentions. Now, if you've got a plant that you know you're going to water a reasonable amount, so we're looking at plants like, things like pumpkins and courgettes and stuff like that are very dependent on water, and also your beans and your peas and stuff like that. What you need to do is plant the plants in an indention in the ground. Now, this can be also called basin watering. So basically, what you would do is make like a basin shape around your plant, so that when you're watering, the water will stay within a foot or so of the plant base, so then that water will soak down directly where the plant is. This is particularly useful when you're watering with a watering can, because you can basically target water the plants that need it the most. The other thing that you can potentially do is get a watering can, a planting pot like this, and sink that into the ground by a plant, and then rather than watering the ground, you water the pot, and then that will then fill with water, and then the water will be released under the ground where the plant's roots are. Obviously, the other way of the other thing you can do is get a pot bottle, cut off the top, and then put loads of holes in the bottle, and you can water into the bottle, and that will then release the water into the ground where the roots are, which is where it's needed. Okay, point 14 is plant your plants close together. Now, this is to reduce the evaporation effect and the wind effect. If you've got lots of plants close together, or as close as practically you can get them together, then you're going to reduce the amount of water that's lost through evaporation, etc. Number 15 is knowing your plant's growing periods. Now, certain plants need water throughout their lives, and all plants will most certainly need water as they're establishing themselves in the ground, but a lot of plants are quite sort of drought resistant. However, if they're fruiting or if they're forming the tubers underground and stuff, this is the period in their growing cycle where they need the most amount of water. Like potatoes, for example, they really do need the water around week 5 to week 8 after you've planted them, because that's when the roots are forming the tubers and that, which are obviously the potatoes that you want to keep. And obviously, runner beans, you need to water them when they're getting established, and then they'll sort of grow sort of merrily up the poles and stuff, and you need to water them perhaps a couple of times a week during that period. As soon as the flowers start to form, and then the runner beans start to form, etc., what you will need to do is water almost on a daily basis if it hasn't rained, because they're very hungry for the water. Peas and obviously things like that are also similar, and also other bean varieties. And on the same vein as that, point 16 is all about trench composting your plants. So, like where I'm going to put the runner beans, what I've done is I've dug a trench, and I'm filling that trench with compost and organic material, and what that's going to do is hold the moisture around the roots of the plant. So if you've got peas, beans, potatoes or anything like that, get as much organic material in there as you possibly can do, which is going to hold the moisture in the ground, and the roots will be able to establish that, get to that and establish themselves a lot quicker, and hold water. So if you're planting any crops like that, dig a trench in the ground and then get as much organic material in there. You can use newspaper, straw, obviously all the kitchen waste, etc. Chuck all that in, eggshell, the lot, chuck all that in, and then bury it, and then plant your plants on top of that. The roots will go down and get all that nutrition, but more importantly, what we're talking about today is they will get the moisture from that, because that will retain the moisture in the ground that the roots can get hold of. Number 17 is eliminate all weeds. Obviously you don't want any weeds on your allotment anyway, but weeds what weeds are doing is taking the moisture out of the ground and losing it through the leaves. Obviously, you know, during the photosynthesis. So what you need to do is make sure you've got the minimum amount of weeds on the garden, because they're just taking all the moisture and nutrients out of the ground that you want for your vegetables. So minimise the amount of weeds that you've got. Ideally, eliminate all the weeds. Excuse me. The next one is watering tip is don't water shock anything that's in your greenhouse. And what I mean by that is, rather than when you go out to get your water from the watering butt, in the summer the temperatures are going to be similar anyway, so you don't really need to worry too much in the summer. But most certainly this time of the year, as you're establishing plants, what you need to do is fill your water butts the day before, leave them in the greenhouse full of water, and then the watering can overnight and during the day will acclimatise to the same temperature as your greenhouse. So when you're watering your plants in your greenhouse, you're not putting cold water onto the roots, which will then shock the roots, and that's you know, that's not good for the water uptake or the plants themselves. So when you're watering your greenhouse, always make sure that the water's been in the greenhouse for a few hours at least, if not a day, before you water them. What I always do is water the greenhouse, and then as soon as I've watered the greenhouse, I fill the water butts up again and then put them back in the greenhouse for the following day. That's the best way to do it. So if you get into the habit of doing that, that's most certainly the best way. And point 19 and 20 are kind of similar. Point 19, what I'd like to say is, for seeds and really young plants, always use tap water. The reason being is there's little bacteria or sort of anything that's going to cause you problems with your seeds, particularly for young plants. So when you've got seeds and stuff growing, always water them at least for the first few days with tap water. What you can do again is recycle a pop bottle, as I've explained before, and either drill holes in the top there, fill that with tap water if you've just got a few seedlings, and then you can water from the from the bottle. So keep a fresh supply of tap water in your greenhouse. Again, the same temperature as the greenhouse. Or obviously fill your normal watering can with tap water rather than water that you've saved yourself. And the final point 20, is rainwater is always best for your garden. So as soon as the plants are established, as soon as the seeds are away, switch over to rainwater that you've collected in your barrels, because in tap water there are a few things in there. Fluorine, fluoride is in the water. You also get heavy metals, things like lead, also things like mercury and chromium-6. All of these will build up in the soil, and these are not good for your plants. So you are much better off using rainwater that you've collected in your water butts than actually using tap water for established plants, because these things I've just mentioned, there's also arsenic as well there's traces of arsenic in tap water. As I say, lead, chromium-6, mercury, and also fluorine, which is put in there deliberately. These will build up in your soil, and these are not good for your plants. So try to avoid using tap water as much as possible as soon as your plants are established. And those are the top 20 tips that I can give you for watering your plants and garden. Okay, so this is a continuation of Mother Nature Part 11, which is talking about water. And what I want to talk about in this particular section is the water table, which is where the water lies underground. Now, dependent on the type of soil that you've got, the water will be pulled up out of the ground to, closer to the surface. Now, this is by a phenomenon called capillary action. Now, if you look at a glass of water, if you look at the edges of the water, it doesn't just go straight to the glass. At the edges of the water will start to go up towards the edge of the container, and this is capillary action. Now, if you get a very narrow tube and put it in water, what you'll find is the water will actually climb up inside the pipe, and this is all down to the surface tension of the water molecules. And what they'll try to do is pull themselves up the pipe or up the sides of the glass, etc. This same phenomena happens everywhere with water. It's happening in the ground. Now, if you've got very fine ground particles, so you've got either a silty or a clay type soil under your ground, the subsoil I'm talking about now, not the topsoil, what this will do, it'll actually draw the water up from the ground. Now, if you've got a heavy clay or silt soil, it'll actually raise the water level in the soil by about 6 feet. So, you know, basically as tall as I am. If you've got a finer sand, not sort of clay, but a fine sand type soil, then it'll raise the water level by about 5 feet. If you've got a coarse sand, sort of like sharp sand type ground in your garden, this will only raise the water level by about a foot. So there's a massive difference between just, you know, very fine particles and coarse sand, and this is all down to the capillary action, the gaps between the particles pulling the water up. If you've got a very gravelly ground under your topsoil, this won't have any effect at all with capillary action. It will not raise the water level at all. So your gardens are most certainly going to be dry, arid, and you're most certainly going to need to add a lot more water than you would normally. So understanding your soil, not only the topsoil but what's underneath, is quite important to understand where the water level is under the ground. Now, because I've got quite silty soil, particularly at the bottom of my allotment, the water table sits roughly 3 feet below ground level, the top of the water. Sorry, the top of the ground. So if I dig a hole in my allotment that's 3 feet deep, I can almost guarantee it will fill with water. Which on some, it's a double-edged sword. It's good in some ways because when the roots establish with the larger plants and the bushes and stuff like that, when they go down, they've always got a source of water underground. However, having said that, because the water level's so high in my garden allotment, a little bit of rain and it will very soon flood, which is why I've put the drainage in, which I'll come on to in the next section. Okay, so this section's all about waterlogging and basically how you can get around that. Now, obviously, as I've explained, clay and sort of silty soils will bring the water table up. Not the water table, but they'll bring water up through the ground, so it'll appear just feet below the ground, and you can get around this. And you also have this problem as well in areas where you've got low-lying ground and you've got a very high water table, where you can improve the way that the ground drains, or the way you can get water off the ground by doing a number of things. The first thing you can do is dig ditches within the ground and fill them with gravel. Then of course the water will drain into there and sort of flow away from that particular part of the land. You can install French drains, which is exactly what I've done. And if you look back through my videos, you'll see the French drains, and I've got an interceptor at the end of the path which I'll empty the water out of when it gets too high. You can add to the soil in general, not digging ditches, but in general with the soil, you can add gravel, and you can and very coarse sand, which will again improve the drainage of the soil. You can dig deep, in other words, rather than just digging one spade down as most people do, you dig down one spade and then you dig down another spade and bring up that more silty, finer soil that you get at the bottom up to the top, and adding organic material will then improve. Basically, you're in doing this, what you're doing is you're actually making the topsoil deeper effectively, and what you're doing is making it so that the water will drain through that and away from the plant roots if it's getting waterlogged. And the last thing that you really need to do if you've got waterlogged ground is this has a real tendency of pulling the nitrogen out of the ground. So you need to constantly boost the nitrogen, and what you need to be doing is adding sort of grass cuttings and coffee and things like that, which are going to boost the nitrogen within the ground. Comfrey is another one that you can be digging in to boost that nitrogen. So that's the way you can deal with waterlogged soil. Of course, there are the obvious things which I've already pointed out. Don't walk on the ground, or at least minimise the amount of walking on the ground, because you don't want to compact the ground. You need to loosen up the ground as much as possible, and this will all help by adding organic material and copious amounts of nitrogen rich compounds in there, that you will improve the quality of the soil, and also how it drains away. Okay, one point that I haven't quite touched on yet with regards to the water is if you've transplanted any plants, you've disturbed the roots, etc. What you most certainly need to do is make sure that, because you've taken some of the roots away, that plant's ability to take up water will be most certainly reduced. So what you need to do is make sure that any plant, whilst they're establishing themselves in the ground and reforming the roots underground, you need to make sure that there's plenty of water in there. Mycorrhizal fungi will also help with this process of bringing nutrients and water to the plant. But for the first, most certainly for the first 2 or 3 weeks that you've transplanted a plant, make sure that the ground's always had plenty of water, and there's you know, so the plants can regrow its root system. Just to go over a few points which I've already mentioned, but I just want to reiterate it. The moisture uptake of ground is only around 8 millimetres an hour. So using the pots and the sunken, you know, the indentions in the ground that you can water will make a massive difference to the uptake of water. Don't water too often. You're much better off soaking the ground twice a week than watering a little bit every night. Watering a bit every night, 9/10 of what you put on the ground is going to evaporate anyway. So you're much better off giving the ground a bloody good soaking twice a week, rather than just, you know, going around to the hose pipe for half an hour every night. High yield plants like beans and peas and stuff like that, tomatoes, etc., need constant water. Always make sure that these plants and crops have got plenty of water, otherwise you're not going to be yielding the type of the levels of fruit and vegetables that you would like. So always make sure that these high yield plants have always got plenty of water. And when trees are fruiting, and they are from the point where they flower right the way up to the point where you're picking the fruit, you really need to make sure that there's plenty of moisture in the ground. So trees that are quite young, like these, that haven't really quite established their roots yet, you need to make sure that if they are fruiting, that you know that you water the ground quite regularly, and make sure that there's plenty of organic material in there to hold the water for the plants to access. So I hope this episode of Jim's Allotment has been of some use to you. Please do put your comments below, and please subscribe to the channel. Appreciate all of your support with everything, and I'll see you on the next episode of Jim's Allotment Garden.